There's really never been a better time to be a new motorcyclist. You have access to tons of information on safe riding techniques, gear has never been safer and more accessible, and the sheer magnitude of pretty stellar beginner bikes is through the roof. So let's take a look at 7 ways in which beginner motorcycles have changed over the last 20 years or so. As I mentioned, one of the most obvious ways in which beginner motorcycles have changed is the amount of beginner-oriented motorcycles that are currently on the market. Back in the day, the Honda Rebel 250 was one of the first motorcycles that really pioneered the beginner bike segment. Honda has always made an effort to attract new people to the two-wheeled lifestyle, and the debut of the Rebel was a keystone moment in that initiative. Remember Honda's Nice campaign? They've always wanted to get new people on bikes, and I really appreciate that. The Rebel 250 was produced for decades, used by new riders and MSF course attendees alike. I'm pretty sure everybody's ridden one at some point. Then as race replica sport bikes became popular in the mid to late 80s, Kawasaki released the Ninja 250, which had its own 40-year run. And while these bikes were incredibly successful in their heyday, there are a night and day differences to the beginner motorcycles offered by almost every motorcycle manufacturer today. You've still got small displacement sport bikes from the big four. There's beginner-friendly naked bikes. KTM and Husqvarna have been making incredibly value-driven, stylish, and well-equipped beginner bikes since their partnership with Bajaj. There really are well-rounded commuter bikes like the Honda NX500. There are kind of retro-inspired heritage bikes from Royal Enfield, and even Triumph now has their own line of 400cc bikes that have been wildly successful after their first production year. Seriously, I think they're some of the best on the market. Small displacement bikes that are appropriate for beginners are no longer a footnote on a given manufacturer's lineup of motorcycle, but rather a massive segment of the motorcycle market that's getting more and more attention and investment than ever. Color me surprised that people want cheap, good motorcycles. There's beginner sport bikes, naked bikes, dual sport bikes, adventure bikes, and retro bikes, and really whatever type of riding you want to do, there's a motorcycle that's a great starting point for a new type of rider that's ripe for the picking. And that's super cool, honestly. I think that the diversity of beginner-appropriate motorcycles has done a lot to incentivize new motorcyclists, especially as new rider information becomes more available and accessible that encourages aspiring riders to make smart decisions when it comes to the machine they want to learn on. So whatever your style, there's a beginner bike that looks the way you want it to. Over the years, beginner bikes have also gotten larger and more powerful while still staying within the max power output that's generally accepted to be appropriate for a new rider. The evolution of the Kawasaki Ninja 250 is a prime example of how manufacturers continue to incentivize riders to want to produce the newest iteration of a same bike as opposed to just getting by with an older used model. The Ninja 250 was the beginner Ninja bike for years and years, but then it was bumped to a Ninja 300 in 2012, then a Ninja 400 in 2018, and now the Ninja 500 in 2024, which is really just a 451cc. Sure, it's almost gotten to a point where the most recent 50cc increase is a little superfluous considering the marginal increase in torque, but that is a topic for a whole other video. The Honda Rebel 250 was completely eclipsed by the Rebel 300 and 500 in the late 2010s as well, and they're kind of the de facto beginner cruiser bikes nowadays. What's cool about a bigger beginner bike is that producing a little shy of 50 horsepower is it's enough power to keep a new rider excited and entertained for a few years of riding without being so powerful that they'll scare themselves or get hurt. And they also fall into the A2 license compliance, which is what motorcycle manufacturers typically bill to anyways. And as beginner bikes have gotten a bit bigger, a little bit more powerful, and a little bit more exciting, it has left a lot of older beginner bikes in the dust. Like the GSX-R 250, which I have famously bought and did a lot of atrocious things to, the CBR 300R and even the R3 to an extent are kind of being squeezed out by other 500-ish cc beginner bikes like the Ninja 500 and CF Moto 450 SS. As a Yamaha simp, it is difficult to see the R3 going by the wayside. And as beginner bike segments are becoming increasingly competitive and diverse, other manufacturers who have previously not invested much into the beginner motorcycles are making some cool bikes. A perfect example is the Aprilia RS457, which takes a lot of what we love about the RS660, dials back the power without compromising the handling or sporting ability. This thing has a twin spar aluminum frame on a beginner bike with a 270-degree cross-plane little twin. Come on! And sure, for the average beginner, a Japanese bike may be an appropriate decision because it's cheaper and a little bit more reliable, but it's really cool that for other options that are more distinct and exotic and refined, for a new rider that has a little bit bigger coin purse willing to spend for a tailored experience with a small displacement Italian sport bike. Beginner motorcycles have come a long way in terms of safety features. As more safety-related tech has been pioneered for more powerful machines over the last few years, it's gradually bled down to the small displacement bikes as well. Back in the day, a beginner bike bike would make like 20 horsepower and have drum brakes in the rear. Whereas today, practically every beginner bike is offered with ABS. And yes, you can debate the efficacy of ABS when it comes to highly skilled riders on a racetrack, but when it comes to new riders who have not mastered the controls of a motorcycle, ABS can be a literal lifesaver during the emergency braking scenarios. Certain models will even have switchable ABS, like the Duke 390, that will allow you to deactivate the ABS to the rear so you can have some fun skidding around the back tire like you used to do on your BMX bike back in the day. KTM and Husqvarna's beginner bikes are both routinely equipped with more features than you'd expect to find on a beginner bike, like switchable ride modes and TC. The ride modes include street and rain, which modulate throttle response and power delivery to add an extra level of caution when riding in wet conditions. Combine that with updated suspension and some other cool features, these bikes are really punching way above their weight class. Traction control is another feature that's arguably superfluous for a motorcycle making less than 50 horsepower, but at the end of the day, it's cool to see these safety features making their way onto small bikes and the most vulnerable riders who need them. I think there is a net overall positive outcome for the additions, and they're making their way to small displacement bikes more and more on the market. The technology and features on a beginner bike is also not limited to just safety features. TFT displays are really a dime a dozen these days, so that isn't much to write home about, but it is a stark contrast to a mid-2000s dash with an analog speedo and a little green calculator screen that shows your odometer reading. But man, I do kind of miss those analog rev counters, don't you? So not even considering the screens, beginner bikes are still packed with a ton of features you wouldn't find on beginner bikes like even 10 years ago. The RC390 has adjustable front suspension, unthinkable 10 years ago on a beginner bike. The 450SS has a Brembo brake caliper, and the Ninja 500 has keyless start. Okay, do we need keyless start? Does that really create any positive outcomes for the rider? I mean, not really. Maybe it's a little safer because theft prevention? I don't know. But we're talking about how beginner bikes have changed, and keyless start is definitely a change. A cool feature Kawasaki has on some of their bikes is ErgoFit. The ErgoFit system allows for adjustabilities of the handlebar position, seat, and foot pegs to accommodate riders of different sizes. This is vastly overdue in my opinion, and motorcycle manufacturers building every bike around the ideal 5'10", 165-pound rider is a bit crazy. The amount of adjustability varies across models, but you can find this on bikes like the Ninja 500, Vulcan S, and Eliminator models. One of the greatest reasons we ride motorcycles is for the thrill. There's no question that navigating risky and dangerous situations provides a person with a sense of excitement and accomplishment. Due to the inherent risks and dangers associated with motorcycle riding, it's important that we do what we can to mitigate those risks, like finally honing your fundamental riding skills, being incredibly perceptive of other motorists, and of course, wearing proper riding gear. And thanks to the crash detection system Cardo has pioneered in the new PackTalk Pro, you can be that much safer while out on the road. The PackTalk Pro unit has a built-in IMU that measures acceleration and velocity. When paired with the Cardo Connect smartphone app, this data is continuously recorded and analyzed to determine whether or not a crash has occurred, much like the systems found in airbag vests. To rule out false positives, an alert is sent to the rider's phone. If not cleared, an automatic text including the rider's GPS location will be sent to a predetermined emergency contact, accelerating the rate at which they may be able to receive life-saving medical attention. While the risky nature of motorcycles is part of what makes them so fun, taking proper safety precautions is of course necessary. And the crash detection system in the PackTalk Pro offers peace of mind not just for the rider, but for their loved ones as well. If you'd like to learn more about all the other features found in the PackTalk Pro and potentially add one to your arsenal of riding gear, hit the link down below and use the code YNCardo to receive 10% off of your order. Big thanks to Cardo for supporting what we do here on the channel. Now let's get back to the video. Beginner bikes today also have a much greater overall fit and finish than they used to back in the day. Sure, you're not going to get the most premium master cylinder, but they offer an overall better package than you might think on beginner bikes. Many competitive bikes will have things like LED lighting that contribute to an overall more put together feel. Also, speaking of features beginner bikes have, all of these bikes have smartphone connectivity now, which again, kind of a superfluous thing in my opinion, but a Ninja 500, 450SS, and Duke 390 all have smartphone connectivity. Of course, taste is subjective, but I think across the board, most motorcyclists can agree that beginner bikes have become more stylish and visually appealing in the last decade. As new generations of young riders have more access to cross-shop, they aren't going to just cross-examine spec sheets and features, but also be influenced in their purchasing decisions based on the visual and emotional appeal of a certain motorcycle. You can see this in the growing popularity of bikes like those from Royal Enfield. On paper, Royal Enfield INT 650 falls short in comparison to most other motorcycles of a similar price range, but they've managed to capture the appeal of younger riders because frankly, their retro roadsters are pretty nice looking, you know? And they have a big bike feel and a big bike burble. Beginner sport bikes have continued to glow up as well, taking styling cues from many of their larger race-bred counterparts. I mean, the 450SS and CBR 500R both have winglets now. Does that mean it's immediately more visually appealing? I mean, not necessarily, but a ton of people seem to gush over winglets, so that's indicative of something. If you consider the Rebel 250, which is a pretty atrocious little bike by most rules of automotive design, it was massively revamped and restyled when Honda released the updated Rebel 300. Beginner motorcycles are bigger, packed with more features, and also offer a more pleasingly visual aesthetic that makes them look more akin to a big bike than's been seen in frequent updates. I mean, think back to a Ninja 250. It literally looked like a dumpy little bike, but you get an Aprilia RS 457 nowadays, it looks like a super bike. Obviously, trends come and go, and what's attractive to one rider may not scratch the itch for another, but I think it's fair to say, as a whole, beginner bikes are the best looking they've ever been. And as beginner bikes have gotten bigger, nicer, and more well-equipped, they've also gotten more expensive. Of course, everything's gotten more expensive, really in the last 3 years, and will really only continue to become more expensive as the years go on. That's the way economics works, and it's hard to deny that many of the upgrades and premium add-ons manufacturers put on their bikes allow them to ultimately charge higher prices. You know ABS will cost more, different paint options or limited trims will cost more, and that's all in reference to MSRP. Crappy dealers are still out here ripping off brand new riders left and right, charging $9 grand out the door for a Ninja 500, but that is likely a symptom of greater economic issues people are facing right now, including crazy interest rates and the way manufacturers charge dealers for holding inventory and all of those other factors. All that considered, whether they be more outright expensive or just otherwise difficult to afford, beginner bikes are still the most value-driven they've ever been. For instance, in 2014, a base model Ninja 300 without ABS had an MSRP of $49.99, and now, 10 years later, the base model Ninja 500 without ABS has an MSRP of $5,300. And yeah, on the base trim you don't get ABS or the fancy TFT display or all those other premium add-ons, but pound for pound, considering inflation, a $300 increase for the Ninja 500 versus the 300 over 10 years is really not that bad. I think overall the average price of a beginner motorcycle is definitely trending upwards, and your chances of getting a quote-unquote good deal at a dealership are getting increasingly rare. They obviously exist, and a lot of dealerships are good to work with and eager to move inventory, especially on certain bikes from a previous model year, to make room for new models on the showroom floor. But I definitely hear more horror stories of people getting absolutely insane out-the-door prices for bikes sometimes, so whether it be due to the price of bikes themselves as they become bigger and more equipped, dealer practices, or a combination of both, getting a beginner motorcycle is definitely becoming more expensive. And look, I understand that, for the past 3 years, prices have increased like 20% or something like that, and wages certainly haven't increased 20%. But on the lower end of the income spectrum, wages have gone up quite a bit, and you're getting way more bang for buck with these beginner bikes nowadays. And also, if you're willing to wait a year or two, you can get really good deals for used bikes. So are all these changes and improvements to beginner bikes worth the added cost? Are you out there looking for a brand new 40th anniversary Ninja 500 SE ABS? Or are you going to track down the marketplace Ninja 300 for a third of the price out the door? Overall, I think most of these changes are positive and have really created a pretty cool landscape for entry-level motorcycles. I think we live in the best time for bikes. There's really no better time to get started, and a vast swath of exciting value-driven bikes is one of the greatest contributing factors to that. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end. If you like what we do here and you want more daily motorcycle content in your feed, subscribe to the channel and keep your eye out for all the exciting things we have in the works. See you later. Fact: on most maps, the Mercator projection, first developed in 1569, is still used. This method is wildly inaccurate and makes Alaska appear as large as Brazil and Greenland 14 times larger than it actually is. Goodbye. Boys, our time is up here. It's a little sad, but this video is over. However, this MT-09 SP is up for grabs on yammynoob.co, and the coolest part is if you become a member, not only is it the best way to support the show, but you get access to chat with me on Discord. So if you want the conversation to keep going, become a member on yammynoob.co in the link in the description down below. But if you want a little bit of distance between me and you think I'm a weird guy, which is completely fair, hit the link right over here. Check out this next Yammy Noob video. You will not regret it. I guarantee it. I'm sure it's top tier stuff.